Hey guys, welcome back to Brian's Mysteries and Adventures on Trail, and today we are going to be going to a park that we've never been to before, Devil's Den State Park in the northwestern part of Arkansas. And I know the name is crazy, and once you see some pictures, it really is an interesting park. But before we get into that, I just wanted to talk a little bit about Black History Month, and we celebrate it every year here in the United States, and it's obviously going on right now because we celebrate it in the month of February. And a few years back, we opened up museum called the Legacy Museum. It's in Washington, D.C. And if any of you are ever going to be in D.C. or the area for work or family or just traveling through, I highly recommend you checking this museum out. Now, since there's been so much craziness in the world lately, the museums all have been closed and they have just reopened in the recent months. So they have been getting kind of crazy crowded. This museum costs $5 for general admission. I'm going to have a link to the description in my description where you can, buy tickets if you're going to be in the DC area, or if you have any questions, you can just let me know. I'll have the link, as I said, and there's all the information about the museum, any questions you may have. And I highly recommend, if you are going to be in DC and are planning to go to any museum, definitely call ahead or go to their website, because the museums have been getting very crowded lately just because they were closed for basically over a year. All right, so today we are going to be, like I said, going to the Devil's Den State Park in Arkansas, and we are going to be talking about the disappearance of Rodney Letterman. Yes, that's his name. He went by Rod. And, he was a very hard worker. He worked in various construction jobs, and he was from Butterfield, Oklahoma. He was only 33 years old at the time. And this happened back in 2017 in August. So he went to the Devil's Den State Park with a friend, and they were just doing some day hiking. Now, unfortunately, Rodney wasn't carrying a pack of any kind. He just had basically 1.5 liters of water. And this is again where, when you hear more of the story, this is a perfect example where it would be a good time to have carried a fanny pack, because somebody that doesn't want to carry a pack, but they also need to carry certain things, this would be a great time for that. Now, to understand this, we have to look at this park a little bit more in depth, because it is a very strange park. I mean, it's beautiful in some ways, but it's also very odd compared to some of the other parks that we've explored on this channel and where other people have gone missing. Devil's Den State Park is roughly 2,500 acres. It's one of Arkansas's biggest state parks. It's in Washington County, in the northwest corner. And it was built back in the 1930s by the Civilian Conservation Corps, part of FDR's New Deal program. If we look at some of these maps and some of these pictures, you can see it's very dense, especially in the midst of summer, which this was towards the end of August. So everything would have been in full bloom. Everything would have been like full up. And according to the assistant superintendent, Tim Scott, at the time, he said that thankfully during this summer, the temperatures were a little bit below normal and they hadn't been getting as much rain. But this park has a myriad of different cave systems, and a lot of the trails sort of look like this. They'll have like a rocky start, and then you literally look like you're going into a tunnel, and then all of a sudden you're in this giant forest, and it can get very dense very fast. And a lot of times the weather can move in very fast. According to them, they get thunderstorms in the evenings a lot because of the high humidity and the high temperature. Now, this is Rodney. Like I said, he was only 33 years old at the time, and he was familiar with hiking. I mean, they had gone to different parks and whatnot, but definitely wouldn't go as far to say that he was an experienced hiker. He had, just gone every now and then. And on this particular day, right around noon, his friend headed back to the car because apparently Rodney, his blood pressure was getting high and he had medication on him, but it was in the vehicle. Now, when his friend returned to the point where on the trail where he had left Rodney, now he had left Rodney on this trail called the Butterfield Hiking Trail. It is roughly a 15-mile moderately trafficked trail that is rated difficult by all trails. And we're going to take a look at some maps, but this is some of the terrain that surrounds it. And one of the problems is that this trail begins in Devil State Park, but then it passes through Ozark National Forest before coming back on the other loop and coming back into Devil State Park. And according again to the assistant superintendent, this trail is very difficult for many reasons, and the way it winds around and sort of interconnects with other trails, if you're not familiar, if you don't know, if you don't have a map, or if you don't watch the signs, it's very easy to get disoriented. And unfortunately for Rodney, instead of just staying put, we surmise that he started walking, or maybe his blood pressure got worse and he tried to seek help. Of course, his friend obviously contacted the authorities. They immediately started a search. The friend that had been hiking with Rodney, all he could tell the authorities was that Rodney was feeling fatigued and he wanted him to go back for his medication, and that all he had with him was 1.5 liters of water. He didn't have a pack, anything else. Now, his family immediately came down. His family and his wife immediately traveled down from Oklahoma to join the command center. It was roughly a 3-hour drive, and by that time, they had already been searching a few hours. And this search was very intense. They had over 130 people. They were searching with ATVs because this terrain is very thick. It's very lush and rugged. They had specialists with special horseback riders that could, travel through the dense brush. And then, of course, they also had, the regular guys on foot that were just trucking through this vegetation. And like the guy said, that the only thing that was on their side was the weather. It was sort of staying moderate. The humidity wasn't that bad, and it wasn't getting that cool at night. So at least they had that on their side, because usually the weather isn't on SAR's side during these searches. Now, they searched over 4,000 acres, or the total of 6 square miles during this search. And unfortunately, after almost 10 days of searching and at total over 150 people, like I said, all the different types of searchers that they were using, via horses, ATVs, specialists. And unfortunately, even through all that, they found nothing. And sadly, like when that happens, after a while, the cases just slowly go colder unless the family is sort of local and they're putting a lot of effort into it. But it's expensive. I mean, a one-day search paid for by a family can be upwards of $10,000 if there's drone teams or helicopter teams involved. I will say, though, with this particular search, they did an amazing job. They worked in shifts, they worked overnight, and they had an amazing mapping system, which is very important because oftentimes if you're going to go back 2 years later, it's important to have a map of where you've searched in the past or where other searches have taken place, because even though oftentimes remains are found in areas that have already been searched, you have to have an idea so that you're not constantly searching the same place over and over. And that's important in this story. During this initial search, despite all their efforts, the only thing they found was Rodney's cell phone, but unfortunately it wasn't able to lead them for any further clues. Now, around 18 months later, there was a gentleman that just decided to go for a day hike, and he was hiking through the Devil's Den State Park in Arkansas, and he stumbled upon remains. And of course, he was obviously shocked and taken aback. So this was down by the Lee Creek Valley, and of course in the Ozark National Forest part of the park. And according to the superintendent, this guy, Tim Scott, he said that this area was so rugged and so dense that hardly anyone ever went into that area. Maybe a few hunters here and there, but he couldn't believe that the remains were found there. So they went back and they did some checking, because unfortunately at this point they were so far degraded they couldn't tell anything, and they had to send them out to a lab. They had a specialist come in, they had a whole team actually come in and package up what they had found and then send it to the special lab. And it wasn't until a few months later that they actually determined that it was the remains of Rodney Letterman. This was in the end of March of 2019 when the Washington County Sheriff's Office finally came out with the announcement that the DNA did match the remains to Rodney Letterman. However, the cause and manner of death could not be determined due to the length of time that had passed. And what was also interesting was they would not release any further information. Now, where they were found, like I said, they were in a very remote area, so they got out their maps and records, because they found it bizarre, because Rodney was a big guy. He was over 6 feet tall, 240 pounds, so they couldn't believe that they missed him in the first place. and they wanted to double back, and they checked their records, and they found that where the remains were found were searched twice back in 2017 during the initial searches. So they deduced that Rodney had somehow managed to get out of the search grid, which this isn't the first time we've seen this. This happens all the time where areas are searched and then later on the remains are later found in the areas that are searched. Who knows how it happens, but this goes again back to one of the pieces of advice that I often give. If you do get lost, especially if it's in a traveled area, a park, especially if somebody went out to get medication and said they'll come back to you at that spot, if at all possible, stay put. Now, Rodney apparently had some medical conditions, some heart conditions, so it's possible that he started having something to do with his heart and he panicked. We'll probably never know. But again, the fanny pack could have come in handy here because he would have had his medication on him right then. It's one of those tragedies because we don't know what happened. We don't know if it could have been avoided. We just know that it happened. And this park is a very interesting park. There's all these things all over, which whoever put these together spent a lot of time. The ground isn't even. There's caves all over the place. It's an interesting park because there's so many different land structures. There's lots of different forests and hiking trails and landscapes. I don't know. It's just I'm not sure why it got the name Devil's Den, possibly because there's so many different caves and there's so many different areas that look like you're going into a cave or a den, where the trail sort of goes into this section that looks like you're going into a giant tunnel. It's considered to be a relatively safe park. It's not like, despite the name, a lot of people are going missing all the time. This was one of those tragedies that unfortunately, had things been different, if he had been carrying a pack, if there'd been more people, maybe he dropped his cell phone, because I did do some research and throughout the park there is cell phone reception. Now, of course, it looks like he traveled south from the Butterfield Trail and he made it almost all the way down to 74, all the way down at the south side of Ozark National Forest. So, who's to say, like, if he had gotten just a little bit further, he might have made it out. But it's, when you're looking at it from above, it's totally different than when you're actually hiking through it. It looks a lot easier when you're looking at it from above. So when I'm putting these pictures up, just keep that in mind. And one of the other things that I read about this Butterfield hiking trail, where it goes off to, and one of the things that I think was working against them was that a lot of the parts, this park is a lot of, there's parts where people take ATVs and off-road motorcycles. And unfortunately, where there was a lot of areas that were inaccessible to what they call wheeler traffic. So unfortunately, all the people that were on those type of transports, they wouldn't have passed Rodney if he needed help. And unfortunately, it sounds like from where he was found, now that's where his remains were found. It's impossible to say where that's where he passed or that was where his last location was. It was such a long time later. It's really sad because we'll probably never know. But I'm sure the family is glad to have at least a little bit, some closure, so that they can give Rodney a proper burial. And that's always something, but it's just a tragedy. And my thoughts and prayers go out to his whole family, his friends, everybody who worked so hard to help him and bring him home. I want to thank you all for watching, as always, and please be respectful in the comments if you choose to leave them. Special thank you to co.ag for providing the background music. And if you guys have never checked these guys out, definitely go check out their channel. They have a myriad of different music and all kinds of genres. They're just awesome and they're so wonderful to work with. So, all right, guys, I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Hey guys, thanks for sticking with me to the end. And one of the reasons I want to be talking about some of these cases that we've recently been talking about is just to hopefully try and prevent some of these same things from happening in the future. Now again, with Rodney's case, it's hard to say what happened. All we know is that he was starting to have a heart palpitation or something to do with his blood pressure. He sent his friend away, excuse me, for the medication, and when his friend came back, he was gone. It's impossible to know whether something got worse with his heart and he tried to go find help on his own, or he just wandered off. Maybe he went to use the bathroom and got disoriented. In places on the East Coast out here where it's very thick brush and it's very dense, it's easy to get lost because everything looks the same. You get turned around very easy. And again, that's why I think fanny packs and something like a Garmin InReach are great tools. But again, it's all up to you guys, and just want you guys to be safe out there and enjoy your time in the outdoors. See you next time.